Do you think Aaron Judge's postseason somewhat overshadowed the amazing season that he had?
Yes, I do, Cam. And it is what Yankee fans will remember. Maybe all fans will remember to some degree.
It is Ken Rosenthal, our FT senior insider. And Ken, now we can take a deep breath and ask you all about your AL MVP ballot. So do you want to run through how you looked at things? And of course, your thoughts on the results, which I don't think there's much to it.
Right. There was no surprise in the results. I guess the biggest questions for me were Gunnar Henderson and Juan Soto 3-4. And I heard what Cam just said about Jose Ramirez. He certainly was merited. Long look in that conversation as well. Long consideration. And I would agree with Cam that he is underappreciated. So that was kind of one decision. I ultimately went with Henderson third and Soto fourth, Ramirez fifth. Because Henderson, to me, his WAR was comparable to Soto. His offense was not what Soto's was, particularly in the second half. But he's an up-the-middle defender. Pretty good defender. He didn't have an amazing defensive year, but he had a good year. And he's a guy also that was the centerpiece of everything that they did. And they had an amazing year. It didn't go as well toward the end, of course. So that is why I put him there. I know he had Santander with him, and Santander hit 44 homers, but Santander also had a 308 on base. He was not Aaron Judge, and that's the benefit that Soto had from being in the Yankee lineup. Nothing against him, of course. He did what he had to do. But that's why I went that way. And then lower in the ballot, I don't remember exactly where I had each guy now off the top of my head, but I had Class A up pretty high, and I had him ahead of Skubal. And some people I saw on X question that. The reason, to me, that a reliever placed so high is that, one, he had an amazing season, a historic season for a team that, of course, won its division. Reliever in an MVP race plays a more meaningful role in some respects than a starter does. He participates in more games. There you see it. Clase was 7, Skubal 8 for me. Guerrero, I might have had a little bit low. When you get down to the bottom of the ballot, guys, I don't know that it's that big a deal one way or the other. I know people go crazy. Oh my gosh, how could you have Clase 7th? I think there are bigger things to worry about. It's a personal preference at that point. But Judge over Witt unanimously, that was not a surprise at all. Witt getting all 32nd place votes, not a surprise. He deserved them. You could quibble certainly with Soto. He was an MVP finalist. Most people had him ahead of Henderson, though it was very close. But that was basically how I broke it down.
So now we need to know exactly what Keith Law said yesterday. He told us to touch grass. He told us to ground ourselves. We were talking about his third place vote. So, and you've already hit that. You've hit that. You said, it's farther down on the ballot. I'm trying my best, that type of thing. If Jose Ramirez hits his 40-40 mark, does that change in your narrative? Because we have you on here twice a week, and I listen to Fair Territory twice a week. You always talk about the whole thing, and you even just said it. Class A's out there more often. It's hard for you to vote a DH because they're just not out there. Does that number 40-40, would that have given enough for Jose to jump maybe a Gunnar Henderson or a Juan Soto?
That's a good question. And he came close, right? And narratives do play a part in this. They necessarily shouldn't, but they do. To me, Jose Ramirez had an amazing year. And heck, I could have put him third regardless of 40-40, right? 40-40 should not matter when you come as close as he did. But at the same time, I just thought Henderson in the first half in particular was incredible. He was probably right there in the conversation for MVP of the first half. Now, he didn't have as good a second half. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't terrible. Still had a 799 OPS. But Ramirez is a guy that I'm going to go back to what Cam said. I do think he doesn't get enough due. And maybe my ballot reflects that, right? But I also should say this, guys. When you say, well, Keith said about touching grass, and I just talked about down ballot, we take the entire ballot seriously. I'm not joking around here, just filling in names. And it becomes a subjective process. It is a subjective process, and that's kind of the beauty of the MVP to me. That's why I always like MVP as opposed to best player. Best player, that's easy. MVP, because you're considering a player's contribution to his team and how meaningful that is, that's a hazier question, and it makes for better baseball discussion. We can argue about these things all day long, and your opinion, whoever's opinion is out there, all the three of you guys, everybody else, it's as good as mine. But that's the way this process works. And frankly, it usually ends up in the right place overall, right? We got the right winners this year, I think, pretty much in every category. So you're going to have arguments along the way. We all understand that. Our ballots are public, fair game, and that's fair as well. But most voters, nearly all voters, I should say, take the process extremely seriously, and it's not something that we just sit down at the end of the season and say, okay, here's my 10. No, we're looking at it the whole year. We're judging it, especially in September. We're kind of starting to think about it more, and we go from there.
Let me ask you this. And you know what? One thing I do appreciate, Ken, you never hide. That's what I love. Whatever you do or say, you stand behind it. But you look at Aaron Judge and his incredible year, and as the playoffs go on, I look at the Yankees fans and how disappointed they always are when they don't finish the job. In my eyes, it doesn't, overshadow anything. But do you think Aaron Judge's postseason somewhat overshadowed the amazing season that he had?
Yes, I do, Cam. And it is what Yankee fans will remember. Maybe all fans will remember to some degree. Now, obviously, an intelligent person can separate the two. We all know the regular season is one thing, the postseason is another. But Aaron Judge is going to hold a conference call today, and I'm sure the postseason is going to come up, right? I'm sure in spring training it's going to come up. It's a narrative that he's going to need to change at some point in his career. And I've always said this, and I'll maintain it with Judge. And to a certain extent, it started happening later in the World Series. He had a big game in Game 5 before the drop ball, of course. He is a guy that is a great player. Barry Bonds was a great player. There have been other great players who initially struggled in the postseason. And my feeling has always been, and I was taught this kind of at a young age, give a guy enough chances in the postseason, give a great player enough chances, he's eventually going to show why he's great. And obviously the pitching is tougher. The focus on these kinds of players in particular is more intense. And you can understand why it's not as easy for them. But we judge players by how they do in October. That's where they make their mark, their biggest marks perhaps. And Judge, to this point in his career, hasn't had that kind of amazing postseason experience.
Let me follow too, Ken, with this. And I was always an advocate prior to, and I know Juan Soto is still in limbo, but let's just say Juan Soto doesn't sign back with the Yankees. And I would never blame the longevity of a season on a misplay by Aaron Judge, but I still think his best value is in right field. I just do. Is there a world where if they don't sign Soto, he goes back to right field and they look for somebody else, if it's Jason Dominguez, to play center? But to sometimes I think to take some of that wear and tear off of his body, because playing center field, most of my career, it is hard on your body. And then, as the season gets in October, you start running on the balls of your feet. You start getting on your heels. I just think things like that, having to cover all that ground you saw during the postseason, is there a world where he goes back to right field?
There is a world where he goes back to right field. And frankly, even if they re-sign Soto, I know at that point he probably is in center, but they have got to think about getting him back to a corner. And Aaron Judge did not embarrass himself in center field last year. I don't care what the metrics say. They weren't good, right? They were well below average. He was toward the bottom of the league in metrics among center fielders. However, as I said, he held the position down, and he did it in a way that helped the team because it enabled Soto to play right, Verdugo in left. That was their best option. But for his long-term benefit, and for the team's long-term benefit, he's best in right. He is best in right for the reasons you stated, the wear and tear on his body, and he's also an above-average right fielder. He's a really good right fielder. So I don't know how this plays out if they re-sign Soto, but yes, it would behoove them to get him back to a corner, and it probably would be better for his career as well. Now, he does like playing center field. It's almost like Mookie Betts enjoying playing shortstop. Judge played center field in college, and he has spoken about how he likes seeing the whole field, being in that kind of commanding, captain-like position in the defensive situations. But Cameron, you're absolutely right, man. He's better off in a corner.
All right, Ken, let's hit free agency for a few minutes here to finish. So I see one or two Bregman Astros questions popping up, which actually fits perfectly into something we have planned for later in the show. We do free agent fits. We pick where we think a free agent is going to end up, basically just a prediction segment. So if you want to throw a team out there for Bregman, and also maybe get into what you wrote about in your notes column in The Athletic about Bregman and the comp that he is reaching for.
Right. Well, what I wrote was this, that most of the projections for Bregman seem to be in the $150 million to $180 million range. What I wrote, and I was very clear about this, but people took it the wrong way. I said, I suspect, my opinion, I suspect that he's going to seek a deal closer to Manny Machado's 11-year, $350 million extension with the Padres. Now, I don't have information to that regard. I was just saying I suspect it. Because when you break those two guys down, it's closer than you might think. And Machado obviously is Machado. He's an elite defender, and he's a great player. But in many ways, so is Bregman. And again, comparing the numbers and just what they've accomplished, Bregman, of course, has the amazing postseason experience as well. He is a guy that I can see wanting more than 150 to 180 when Manny got 350. I'm not saying that's what he's looking for. I don't know what he's looking for. But I suspect that he sees himself, and Boris sees him, as that kind of guy. So let's make that clear. That was my opinion. Now, as for the teams that fit, it could be any number of them, right? Detroit with A.J. Hinch. That's one team he could be linked to and will be linked to. Houston, of course, wants him back. I could see the Mets or the Yankees, more so the Mets than the Yankees because of what happened in 2017, if indeed they are Soto losers. And he could end up in other places as well. He is someone that right now, because Matt Chapman signed his contract with the Giants, is the best third baseman available. And that's a spot where a lot of teams have, I don't know if I'd say absolute needs, but certain needs. There are ways that he can go to other teams too in other positions, maybe second base. So I expect Bregman to do well. I don't know how well in terms of his finances and what he's going to be paid, but he's got a pretty strong resume, put it that way.
If you guys don't believe what Ken just said, I did the research after I read what you wrote, and it is very intriguing, very amazing. So do research before you blast Ken on your local social media platforms. One team that's not going to be getting Bregman,
no one will, Eric. Don't worry about it.
Okay, nobody will. Okay, that's fine. Well, maybe my tens of fans will follow what I say and go and do your own research. But one team that won't be getting them is going to be the A's, the Athletics, whatever we're calling the ATHs, and they may not be able to get any free agents. Can you tell us anything about like the struggles that they're clearly running into, needing to play in West Sacramento?
Right. There's an interesting situation developing with the A's beyond the stadium stuff. During the GM meetings, their general manager, David Force, said, listen, we know players are not going to want to necessarily come to Sacramento, play in a minor league park. We are more focused on trades than free agents. That's the way for us to acquire players. The problem that they're running into is that most teams this year, with the possible exceptions of the White Sox and the Marlins, are trying to upgrade their major league rosters. So the kinds of trades that the A's want to make for major league players are difficult. They're not able to trade prospects for players because teams don't really want prospects. They want major leaguers. From the A's, they want guys like Brent Rooker and J.J. Bleday, perhaps Mason Miller. And those are guys that the A's want to keep and build around. They want to go forward now. They want to start contending and competing in a more meaningful way. So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. Can't sign free agents. Difficult to make trades in this environment right now where everybody's trying to upgrade. And I don't know necessarily how they're going to figure this out, but it's certainly going to be a challenge for their general manager, David Forst, and the rest of that front office.
Ken, let's finish with the Rays, since the Rays and A's always feel linked these days, but not about the specific ballpark situation where they're going to play in the future, all of that. But the roster itself, which you wrote about, we didn't get to it, I think, much on Fair Territory. But do you see them continuing to sell? I know they always kind of sell, but in my head, I'm like, okay, when you're Kansas City and you're trying to get a new ballpark, what do? You re-sign to Bobby Witt to a long-term extension. You go get the Waka and the Lugo and all that, and it's worked out, right? They didn't get the approval yet for the ballpark. But on the Tampa Bay side, I think they're such a bottom line team that they're going to say, we're losing more money next year because we have to play in a minor league park. We got to pay the Yankees, the whole deal. So does it seem like they're actually going to lower payroll and they're not trying to impress the city and say, hey, look, we're really building something here?
For starters, Scott, the city question, the county question is entirely separate from baseball. It's not at a point where if they do some things, it's going to impress those people. It's a financial question. It seems to be a political question, and it has nothing to do with the baseball side. There are no votes coming up that are going to change this thing. So ultimately, what they want to do is keep going and try to be as competitive as possible. Remember, they trimmed about $40 million in salaries at the deadline. When they traded Rosarena and Adam and all those guys, they took down their payroll quite considerably for the future. So they can afford to keep Brandon Lau and Yandy Diaz and some of the more expensive players. The question is, how are they going to figure this whole puzzle out? And will they get enough of an offer for any of those guys to make a trade justifiable? They can do that, and they will do that. We've seen that in the past. But this is not a Tyler Glasnow situation where someone's earning $25 million. This is a situation where they've got guys like Yandy at 8 and Brandon Lau at 10.5. They can afford them. And I got to go if you hear that doorbell.
Hey, I like that. Well, it's perfect timing. So that was the last question. So Ken, enjoy your package, whatever you get today. I'm sure it's awesome, and enjoy your HelloFresh or whatever else it is at the door. And we'll talk to you next week, and we'll hear from you on Player Territory.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.